Most people think courage looks loud. A raised voice, a clenched fist, someone stepping forward without hesitation. But on a cold Friday evening in downtown Detroit, courage looked very different. It looked like an old man trying to keep his hands from shaking. It looked like 7 young men laughing while an entire sidewalk pretended not to notice. And it looked like Mike Tyson, standing less than 30 feet away, watching everything happen without saying a single word. At first. Because sometimes the strongest people don't rush into a fight. They wait. They watch. They try to understand exactly who they're dealing with. And that decision would change everyone's night, including his own. Just after 7 o'clock, the streets were beginning to fill. Office workers hurried toward parking garages. Restaurants buzzed with the usual Friday crowd. Street musicians competed with passing traffic. Nothing about the evening felt unusual. Mike Tyson had spent most of the afternoon visiting a local youth boxing program on the east side of the city. The event had ended later than expected, and instead of heading straight back to his hotel, he decided to walk. He often preferred walking. It cleared his head. Fame had made ordinary moments difficult. Everywhere he went, someone wanted a picture, an autograph, a story, a memory. But every once in a while, he found neighborhoods where people simply nodded and kept moving. He appreciated those places. That evening, he wore a dark hoodie beneath a lightweight jacket. A baseball cap pulled low. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. To most people passing by, he looked like any other man enjoying the cool evening air. Exactly how he liked it. He crossed one intersection, stopped at a red light, then continued another block before noticing a small diner tucked between an old bookstore and a family-owned pharmacy. The kind of place that had probably looked the same for 30 years. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Inside, families laughed over dinner. An elderly couple shared coffee in a corner booth. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Mike smiled to himself. Sometimes those simple places reminded him of life before the spotlight. He pushed open the door. The waitress greeted him with a smile. "Table for one?" He nodded. "Anywhere's fine." She pointed toward a booth near the front window. "Perfect." From there he could watch the street while eating. Old habit. Boxers notice exits. They notice people. They notice movement. Not because they're looking for trouble. Because awareness becomes second nature after years inside the ring. A few customers glanced at him. One teenager looked twice, almost recognizing him, then returned to his meal. Mike ordered coffee first, then a grilled chicken sandwich. Nothing fancy. As he waited, he looked outside. Rain clouds gathered overhead. Pedestrians hurried past carrying shopping bags. A delivery truck blocked part of the street. Normal life. Comfortably ordinary. Then something caught his attention. An elderly man slowly approached the crosswalk across the street. Late 70s. Maybe older. He wore a faded green military jacket despite the mild weather. On the left side of the jacket sat several ribbons. Military ribbons. His gray cap carried a small embroidered patch. U.S. Army veteran. The old man leaned slightly on a wooden cane. His movements were careful. Measured. Not weak. Just cautious. Mike watched him for only a second before looking away. There was nothing unusual about an old veteran walking home. Until another group entered the scene. 7 young men. Early 20s. Loud. Confident. The kind of confidence that often came from having 6 friends standing nearby. They weren't gang members. At least not officially. But they carried themselves like they owned the sidewalk. One kicked an empty soda can into traffic. Another shoved his friend while laughing. The tallest among them wore a black leather jacket despite the warm evening. He walked slightly ahead of the others. Naturally. The leader. Mike had met enough people during his life to recognize group dynamics immediately. One talks. The rest follow. The veteran continued walking. Slowly. Calmly. He never even looked toward them. Unfortunately, they noticed him. The leader nudged the man beside him. "Check this out." The others turned. One laughed. Another whispered something. The old veteran kept moving. Eyes forward. Maybe he hoped they would simply pass. Instead, they spread out. Not aggressively. Not yet. just enough to make the sidewalk suddenly feel much smaller. Mike set his coffee cup down.
Still,
He didn't move. Not because he didn't care, because experience had taught him something important. Sometimes situations disappear on their own. Sometimes stepping in too early makes everything worse.
so he watched, carefully.
Across the street, the veteran reached the narrowest part of the sidewalk. The 7 young men stopped walking, creating an obstacle. The old man paused, smiled politely. "Excuse me, gentlemen." No response, only grins. The leader tilted his head. "What's the rush, old-timer?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence around them made every word feel heavier. Several pedestrians noticed. None stopped.
People slowed down.
Looked, then kept walking. Nobody wanted involvement. The veteran remained calm. "I'd just like to get home." One of the younger men laughed.
Home.
Another looked at the ribbons on the old jacket. "What are those?" The veteran glanced down briefly. "My service ribbons." "Oh," the leader replied. "So, you're some kind of hero?" The others laughed louder. Inside the diner, Mike Tyson didn't smile. He didn't frown. His expression barely changed. But something inside him shifted. Because he had seen that look before. Not in boxing. Not in prison. Long before all of that. Growing up in Brooklyn. It was the look people gave someone they believed couldn't fight back.
He remembered it well.
His sandwich arrived. The waitress placed it on the table. "Anything else?" Mike never took his eyes off the window. "No, thank you." She noticed where he was looking. "What are they doing?" "I don't know yet." Across the street, the veteran tried once more. "If you'll excuse me." He stepped forward. The leader matched the movement, blocking him again. Still smiling. Still pretending everything was a joke. But jokes stop being funny when only one side is laughing. A young mother pulling a stroller crossed to the opposite sidewalk. A businessman pulled out his phone. Not to call anyone. To avoid eye contact. The old veteran looked around. Not desperately. Just long enough to realize something painful. No one was coming. Mike slowly reached for his coffee. Took one sip. Set the cup down. His chair moved back. Just a few inches. Not enough for anyone else in the diner to notice. But enough to show he had made a decision. The only question now was, for a few seconds, Mike didn't move. Not because he was afraid. Not because he wasn't willing to help. Because he had learned something the hard way. The first version of every conflict is almost never the real one. Growing up in Brownsville taught him that. People lied. People provoked. People played victims. If you stepped into every situation without understanding it, you could make everything worse. So he watched. Across the street, the 7 young men still surrounded the veteran. Not close enough to touch him, but close enough that every step forward became impossible. The old man looked from one face to another. Patient. Almost exhausted. He had probably seen enough conflict for one lifetime. The leader smiled. "So, you really served?" The veteran nodded once. "I did." "What war?" "Kuwait." One of the younger boys laughed. "My grandpa says everybody claims they're a veteran." Another added, "Maybe he bought those medals online." The group laughed together. Not loudly. Not violently. Just enough to let the old man know they weren't taking him seriously. Mike felt something tighten inside his chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was disappointment. Because he knew exactly what was happening. 7 young men weren't looking for money. They weren't trying to rob anyone. They were entertaining each other. And, unfortunately, the old veteran had become tonight's entertainment. Inside the diner, a couple sitting near the window had also noticed. The husband quietly said, "Someone should help him." His wife looked outside, then looked away. "I hope somebody does." Neither moved. Nobody did. The waitress slowly walked toward Mike's table. "You know him?" Mike looked up. "The old man?" She nodded. "I've seen him around. He comes here every Friday. Eats dinner. Leaves a big tip even though he barely orders anything." Mike looked back toward the window. "What happened to his wife?" The waitress looked surprised. "How'd you know?" "He has a wedding ring. But he's eating alone." She smiled sadly. Passed away about 3 years ago. He still comes every Friday. Sits in the same booth. Orders the same meal. Leaves exactly $20. Mike nodded quietly. Sometimes routines keep people alive after loss. He understood that better than most. Outside, the leader noticed the veteran gripping his cane tighter.
What?
You gonna hit me with that? The others laughed again. The veteran shook his head.
No.
I'd rather go home. One of the boys stepped closer. You ain't answering the question. Were you actually a hero? The old man looked at him carefully, then smiled.
No.
I was just a soldier. That answer surprised Mike. There wasn't pride in it. There wasn't bitterness either. Just honesty. Real veterans often spoke that way. The loudest stories usually came from people who had never been there. The quiet ones, those were different. The leader looked disappointed. That's it. No big war stories? No enemies? No medals for killing people? The veteran answered softly. I don't like talking about those days. Another boy rolled his eyes. I told you. Fake. Mike finally stood. Not quickly. Calmly. He placed enough cash on the table to cover the meal. The waitress looked at him. You okay? Mike smiled.
Yeah.
I just need to take a walk. She looked toward the window again. You going over there? Mike didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked something unexpected. How often do they come around? She sighed. Almost every weekend. They bother people. Mostly older folks. They know nobody wants trouble. Mike nodded once. Now he understood. This wasn't random. They had done this before. The manager called the police several times. By the time officers arrived, they were always gone. The revolving door opened quietly. Mike stepped outside. The cool evening air felt different now. The sounds of traffic seemed distant. His footsteps were slow, measured. He wasn't walking toward a fight. He was walking toward a decision. Across the street, the veteran finally tried moving again. This time, two of the young men stepped sideways, blocking him together. Not touching him, just making it impossible to pass. The leader grinned. Come on. We're just talking. You veterans are supposed to be tough. Why were you so quiet? The old man looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like he'd had this conversation too many times before. I've buried enough friends. I don't need another argument. For the first time, one of the boys looked uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then the laughter returned. Mike crossed the street. Still nobody noticed him. Not the group. Not the veteran. Not the people watching from nearby storefronts. He stopped about 15 feet away. Close enough to hear everything. Far enough not to interrupt. The leader asked another question. So tell us. What was the scariest part? The veteran thought for a long moment, then answered. Coming home. The laughter stopped. Only briefly. One of the boys frowned. What does that mean? The old man looked toward the ground. It means the war ended. But something stayed with us. Nobody spoke. Even the leader seemed unsure how to respond. Mike saw something important. The veteran wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was simply telling the truth. Sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable, especially people expecting a joke. Then one of the younger boys ruined the moment. He reached toward the veteran's cap. Not aggressively. Almost playfully. Let me see this. The old man stepped backward immediately.
No. His voice changed.
Still polite, but firmer now. Please don't. The boy smiled. What? You scared? The veteran held the cap tightly.
No.
I just earned it. That sentence changed something inside Mike Tyson. Because he remembered another man. Cuz D'Amato. The man who taught him respect. The man who taught him discipline. Cuz once told him something he never forgot. You never mock what another man sacrificed to earn. Mike could almost hear those words again. The leader noticed Mike standing nearby. Finally, he glanced over. Saw a middle-aged man in a cap. Nothing unusual. He dismissed him immediately. Then turned back toward the veteran. Big mistake. Mike took 3 more steps forward. Not fast. Not slow. just enough for his voice to carry. Excuse me. All 7 young men turned together. The leader looked annoyed. Yeah. Mike pointed gently toward the veteran. I think he's trying to get home. Silence. Nobody recognized him yet. Not one of them. The leader smirked. And Mike smiled politely. So maybe let him pass. One of the boys laughed. You know him? Mike shook his head.
No.
I just don't like seeing 7 people stop one old man. The leader folded his arms. This got nothing to do with you. Mike nodded. Maybe. But now I'm standing here. And now. It kind of does. The sidewalk suddenly felt much smaller. People walking nearby slowed down. A delivery driver stopped unloading boxes. 2 women exiting a pharmacy paused near the door. Nobody spoke. Everyone sensed the night had just changed. The young man laughed. Not because Mike Tyson had said something funny, because he believed he was still in control. He looked Mike up and down. Average height, baseball cap, dark jacket, no jewelry. Nothing about him looked intimidating. You his lawyer or something? A few of the others chuckled. Mike kept his hands inside his jacket pockets.
His voice stayed calm. No.
I'm just asking you to let him go. The leader smiled. You always stick your nose into other people's business? Mike shrugged. Only when 7 people decide one old man is a fair fight. The words landed harder than anyone expected, not because Mike raised his voice, but because he didn't. There was no anger, no threats, just a simple truth. One of the younger boys looked away. For the first time that evening, someone in the group seemed uncomfortable. The leader noticed it immediately. He couldn't afford to lose face, especially not in front of his friends. So he took one slow step toward Mike. You think you're some kind of hero? Mike smiled faintly.
No.
I think he's trying to get home. Another pause. Traffic rolled past behind them. The light at the intersection changed. People stood on the opposite sidewalk, pretending not to watch. But everyone was watching. Inside the diner, the waitress had stopped taking orders. Even the cook peeked through the kitchen window. Nobody knew what was about to happen. The leader folded his arms. You know what your problem is? Mike shook his head.
No.
You think because you're older, people should listen. Mike couldn't help but smile. I'm only asking for respect. One of the boys scoffed. Respect is earned. Mike looked toward the veteran. I agree. Then he looked back at the group. And that's exactly why he deserves it. Silence. The veteran finally spoke. It's all right. His voice was soft. I don't want anyone getting into trouble because of me. Mike glanced over his shoulder. You served? The old man nodded. 22 years. Mike looked at the ribbons on the jacket again. My father never served, but I had people in my life who taught me to respect those who did. The veteran gave him a small nod. Thank you. The leader clapped slowly. Beautiful speech. You done? Mike sighed quietly. I was hoping you were. The young man took another step. Now only a few feet separated them. You don't scare me. Mike nodded. Good. I wasn't trying to. That answer caught him off guard. He expected insults, threats, a challenge. Instead, he got complete calm. And calm made people nervous, especially people looking for a fight. One of the younger boys whispered, Let's just go. The leader ignored him. He couldn't. Backing down now meant losing authority. He looked directly into Mike's eyes. You got a name? Mike answered without hesitation. Mike. Mike what? Tyson. Nothing happened. At first. The name floated there for a second. The leader frowned. It sounded familiar. One of the boys blinked twice, then stared harder. The shortest member of the group slowly removed one earbud. Wait. He looked again. The cap, the voice, the face. His eyes widened. No way. Another turned. What? The younger boy pointed carefully. Dude. I think that's... He never finished the sentence, because suddenly, he wasn't sure he wanted to. The leader laughed. What? You think that's Mike Tyson? He looked back toward Mike, then laughed even harder. No chance. Mike didn't react. He had heard worse, much worse. One teenager quietly pulled out his phone. Not to record. To search. His fingers moved quickly. Mike Tyson. Images. He looked at the screen. Then back at Mike. Again. Then the screen. The color slowly disappeared from his face. Guys. Nobody answered. Guys. The leader looked annoyed. What? The teenager slowly turned the phone around. On the screen, the same eyes, the same nose, the same jaw, the same calm expression, only younger. The leader stopped smiling. For the first time all evening, his confidence cracked. Just a little. Mike noticed, but he said nothing. Fear wasn't the lesson he wanted them to learn. Respect was. The veteran looked between both sides. Still confused. You two know each other? Mike smiled. No, sir. We just met. The old man chuckled softly. Well, I'd rather meet under different circumstances. Mike nodded. So would I. One of the boys quietly stepped backward. Then another. Nobody told them to. It simply happened. The leader remained where he was. His pride refused to move. You really him? Mike nodded once.
Yeah.
The young man swallowed. You gonna hit me? Mike looked genuinely surprised. No. I haven't touched anybody. The answer hung in the air.
Simple. True.
Powerful. Because it forced everyone standing there to realize something. The only people creating trouble were the 7 men. Not Mike Tyson. Not the veteran. Just them. The leader looked around. His own friends were no longer standing beside him. Without realizing it, they had created distance. He suddenly felt alone. Mike took one slow breath. I'm going to ask you one last time. Let him go home. No shouting. No threats. No dramatic speech. Just one sentence. The leader looked at the veteran, then at Mike, then back toward his friends. Nobody smiled anymore. Nobody laughed. The game was over. He stepped aside. Without another word, the sidewalk opened. The veteran looked at Mike, then at the young men. He adjusted his cap, picked up his cane, and quietly started walking. Halfway past the group,
He stopped.
turned around, looked directly at the 7 young men. I hope one day you understand that respect costs nothing. Then he continued walking. Nobody answered.
Not one of them.
Mike watched him disappear down the sidewalk. Only after the veteran was safely across the next intersection did Mike turn back toward the group. And this time, he wasn't looking at 7 troublemakers. He was looking at 7 young men who still had a chance to become better. For a moment, no one moved. The city hadn't gone quiet. Cars still rolled through the intersection. A bus stopped across the street. Someone laughed outside the diner. Life continued exactly as it had 30 seconds earlier. But inside the small circle surrounding Mike Tyson, everything had changed. The leader looked at his friends. None of them were smiling anymore. The same people who had laughed just minutes ago now avoided looking him in the eyes. He hated that feeling. Not because he feared Mike Tyson. Because he hated looking weak in front of his own friends. Mike noticed it immediately. He had seen that look countless times. In gyms. On the streets. In prison. Young men trying to protect an image they didn't even like.
He spoke first.
What's your name? The question surprised everyone. The young man blinked. Ryan. Mike nodded. Nice to meet you, Ryan. Ryan looked confused. You're serious? I usually am. A couple of the younger boys let out nervous laughs. Ryan shot them a quick look. They stopped instantly. Mike stepped a little closer. Not aggressively. Just close enough that Ryan didn't have to raise his voice. You know something? Ryan stayed silent. When I was your age, I probably would have been standing where you are. Ryan frowned. What?
Mike nodded toward the group.
Trying to impress people. Thinking respect comes from making someone else feel small. Ryan's expression changed. You don't know me.
No.
I don't. But I know that look. Mike paused. I used to wear it. The words caught Ryan completely off guard. He had expected a lecture. Maybe a threat. Not honesty. Mike continued. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, I thought fear made you weak. So, I learned to hide it. I fought. I got arrested. I hurt people. I let my anger decide who I was. The 7 young men listened quietly. Nobody interrupted. Because this didn't sound like a speech. It sounded like someone remembering. Mike looked toward the end of the street where the veteran had disappeared. You know why that man never raised his voice? Ryan shrugged. Mike answered before he could. Because men who've lived through real violence usually don't go looking for more. Silence. One of the younger boys quietly looked at the ground. Mike noticed him. How old are you? 19. You in school? The teenager nodded. Community college. What do you study? Mechanics. Mike smiled. My first love wasn't boxing. It was pigeons. The boys exchanged confused looks. Pigeons? Mike laughed softly.
Yeah.
I raised pigeons when I was a kid. They kept me out of trouble. For a while. Ryan finally asked, so why boxing? Mike looked across the street. Because somebody believed I could become something better. 'Cause tomato. He didn't teach me how to punch first. He taught me how to think. Mike folded his arms. He used to tell me, the toughest man in the room isn't the loudest. He's the one who doesn't need everyone else to know it. Ryan swallowed. Those words hit harder than he expected. Not because they were clever. Because they felt true. Mike continued. You've got 6 friends standing behind you. Ryan looked back. They were no longer standing behind him. Most had drifted several feet away. Not because Mike scared them. Because the excitement was gone. Nobody wanted to be the bad guy anymore. One of the boys finally spoke. We should leave. Another nodded.
Yeah.
Ryan remained still. He looked embarrassed now. More than angry. Mike saw it. He decided not to push. Instead, he asked one final question. Can I tell you something? Ryan nodded slowly. When you get home tonight, you will remember making fun of that old man. But I promise you, he'll remember it. Ryan lowered his eyes. Mike continued quietly. And that's the difference. You lose 5 minutes. He carries it for weeks. Nobody spoke. The weight of those words settled over the sidewalk. Even the people watching from nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. The waitress stood in the diner's doorway. The delivery driver leaned against his truck. An elderly woman walking her dog had paused near the corner. No one had expected the confrontation to end like this. Ryan took a slow breath. Then another. Finally, he looked up. I messed up. Mike nodded.
Yeah.
I did. But that doesn't have to be who you are. Ryan hesitated, then turned toward his friends. Let's go. No arguments. No excuses. The 7 young men began walking away, about 20 feet down the sidewalk. Ryan suddenly stopped. He turned back toward Mike. Hey. Mike looked up. If we see him again, we'll apologize. Mike smiled. I think he'd appreciate that. Ryan nodded once, then disappeared around the corner with the others. The street slowly returned to normal. People started walking again. The delivery truck pulled away. The waitress stepped outside. She smiled. I kept expecting somebody to throw a punch. Mike laughed. So did they. She looked toward the corner where the veteran had disappeared. You think he'll be all right? Mike nodded. I hope so. Then he looked across the street. Near the bookstore, the old veteran was waiting. He hadn't gone home after all. He had been standing there the entire time, watching, waiting. Their eyes met. The veteran slowly removed his cap. Not dramatically, just enough to say, thank you. Mike placed his hand over his heart. The old soldier smiled. For the first time that evening, the lines of worry disappeared from his face. Neither man needed another word. Sometimes, respect says everything silence can't. The old veteran waited until the last of the 7 young men disappeared around the corner. Only then did he slowly walk back across the street. His pace hadn't changed. Still careful. Still steady. But something about his face was different. The tension was gone.
He stopped a few feet from Mike.
For a moment, neither man spoke. The city had become noisy again. Car horns echoed through the intersection. People returned to their dinners. Someone laughed inside the diner. Life had moved on. But for these two men, time seemed to pause. The veteran extended his hand. "My name's Walter." Mike smiled warmly and shook it. "Mike." Walter chuckled. "I know." His grip was surprisingly firm. Not the grip of a fighter. The grip of someone who had spent decades working with his hands. "I owe you dinner." Mike laughed. "I think I can afford my own." Walter smiled. "I know you can. But it isn't about the money. It's about saying thank you." Mike looked toward the diner. "You always eat there on Fridays?" Walter nodded. "For 31 years. Same booth. Same waitress. Same chicken soup." Mike smiled. "That's a long tradition." Walter looked through the window. "It started with my wife." His voice softened. "Every Friday after work, we'd meet there. Didn't matter how busy life got. Didn't matter if we argued. Friday dinner never changed." Mike listened quietly. "When she passed away, I couldn't stop coming. So I kept the reservation. For one." Silence settled between them. Mike had lost people too. People who changed his life. People he still thought about. He understood what traditions could mean. Sometimes they weren't habits. They were memories kept alive. Walter looked down at the old military ribbons on his jacket. "You know, I wasn't embarrassed because they laughed at me." Mike looked at him. Walter continued. "I was embarrassed because, for just a second, I almost took these off." He touched one of the ribbons carefully. "I spent 22 years earning them, but 7 strangers almost convinced me to hide them." Mike didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question. "Did you?" Walter looked confused. "Did I what?" "Take them off." Walter smiled.
No.
Mike nodded. "Then they didn't win." The old veteran looked away. His eyes had become watery. Not from sadness. From relief. The waitress opened the diner's front door. "There you two are." Walter smiled. "Looks like she's rescuing us now." She walked outside carrying 2 steaming bowls. "I figured you'd both skip dinner if I didn't bring it." Mike laughed. "You read minds." She placed the bowls on a small outdoor table.
No.
"I've just worked here long enough." Walter looked embarrassed. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled. "You've been tipping me for 30 years. I think we're even." The 3 of them laughed together. It was the first genuine laughter of the night. No mockery. No tension. Just people sharing a quiet moment. As they ate, Walter noticed several teenagers walking toward them. His shoulders stiffened. Mike glanced over. It wasn't another gang. It was the same 7 young men. Walter quietly put his spoon down. Ryan walked in front. The others stayed behind him. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. "Sir." He wasn't looking at Mike. He was looking directly at Walter. "I'm sorry." Walter remained silent. Ryan continued. "My grandfather served in Vietnam. I never met him. My dad doesn't talk much about him. I guess I forgot what that uniform really means." Walter studied his face. Long enough that Ryan became uncomfortable. Then, the old veteran stood. He extended his hand. Ryan looked surprised. "You still want to shake my hand?" Walter smiled gently. "Everyone deserves one chance." Ryan shook it. His friends followed. One by one. No speeches. No cameras. No audience. Just 7 young men quietly apologizing to one elderly veteran. Mike watched without saying a word. Because this wasn't his moment anymore. It belonged to Walter. After a few minutes, Ryan looked at Mike. "You know, I thought strength meant people being afraid of you." Mike smiled. "I used to think that too." Ryan asked, "So, what is it?" Mike looked toward Walter, then back at Ryan. "Walking away when your pride tells you to stay." Ryan nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." The group left. This time, they weren't laughing. They weren't trying to impress each other. They simply walked away. Walter watched them disappear, then looked at Mike. "You think they'll change?" Mike smiled. "I don't know. But they'll remember tonight. And sometimes, that's enough to change someone's direction." The rain finally began. Soft at first. Tiny drops tapped against the sidewalk. Walter placed his old army cap back on his head. Guess it's time to head home. Mike stood. So is it? Walter smiled. You know, I've met presidents, generals, senators. But tonight, I'll remember the man who simply stood beside me. Mike shook his head.
No.
You'll remember that you stood for yourself. I just happened to be nearby. Walter smiled again. Perhaps he didn't fully agree, but he appreciated the humility. They shook hands one final time, then headed in opposite directions. One toward a quiet apartment filled with memories. The other toward a hotel where tomorrow would bring cameras, interviews, and another busy day. Neither looked back, because they didn't need to. Some moments don't become unforgettable because someone threw a punch. They become unforgettable because
someone chose not to.
And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that Mike Tyson was once the most feared man in boxing, but that true strength isn't measured by how hard you can hit. It's measured by how much power you have, and how wisely you choose to use it.